today's to this evening's and my evening's live broadcast. And today I'm a civil war in Russia. And it was asked of me yesterday, do you think there'll be a civil war? And I said, of course there won't be. And so that's what I still think. But I think the threat of a civil war is something definitely worth talking about. Indeed, this threat came from none other than Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group. Now, let's have a quick think about it. If you wanted to start a civil war, what do you think you would need? I mean, can you just instead of watching me right now, I think, well, maybe I can go in the pub, get a few of my mates, and then they'll get a few of their mates, and they'll get a few of their mates, and together we'll all start a civil war. After all, there's nothing to do this evening, and there's nothing on the television. So the thing is this, though, if you're going to start a civil war, one thing you do need is an army. Because starting a civil war without one, the threat coming from Prigozhin is one war. And I'm also going to make another little prediction here. I'm going to suggest that either he or Putin at the end of this year won't be around. Whether or not one of them is going to have a dodgy kebab, and which has been flavored with some of the other flavors they've been sticking in things for years now in Russia, which has led to people dying. But to my way of thinking, this is the way it's going. Now, Prigozhin, I'll do a little recap on who he is. I think Prigozhin was somebody, he comes from St. Petersburg. He's not within the entourage of Putin from those times. He's too young for that. Most of the Putin's entourage are either older than he was, of the same age. Prigozhin was born in June 1961. That makes him he'll be 62 next month. He at a very early age, he was sentenced for violent assault. First of all, he was found guilty of crimes. If punishment doesn't fit the crime, then people will go on doing it, and he made this point very clear. He was stealing from them. Now, this was quite difficult, of course, because theoretically in the Soviet Union there was no crime. I remember them boasting about this in the 80s. As a communist society, there's no crime at all. What they're saying, in fact, is that there's no way of reporting crime. But the fact is that Prigozhin did go to prison for a very long time for the violent crimes he committed. Having said that, he was out when he was still in his hot dog business, and he himself had to pay off the what do you call these people that come and threaten others, the blackmailers. And as a result of this, he then I suspect that's how he started throwing his muscle around. He didn't pay them, or something along those lines. From the hot dog business, he sort of then got himself into other businesses, and in these, maybe some of them didn't do so well, such as a chain of shops. But I mean, to have a chain of shops in your mid-30s, I don't think that's doing too bad. He had 3 restaurants which did particularly well, and he got a contract supplying Putin. It became sort of Putin's chef, so to speak. Sorry, I've just noticed, sort of completely changing the subject here, that I'm not coming out very well this evening, and this could be due to the fact that I've actually parked in a different position. It must be further away from the internet, and I parked myself here because there was ants' nest, and the ants were getting into my van and coming out very well. But I can see myself now on the internet, and I can see myself in the camera, and on the internet I don't look very good. Anyway, just make that point if anybody wants to complain at the quality which things are coming out at. So Prigozhin got himself well in with Putin, and cooking for him there is, hello Brian, there's also there's film of him with serving George Bush, no less. And because he was well in with Putin, because it's a highly corrupt society, he got himself the contract to supply hospitals and the army and schools, and he made a lot of money out of that. Around 2014 or thereabouts, he started off the Wagner Group in Africa, and it has become like a local warlord in certain gain, such as some mine or something like that, and they're more than happy to take the mine off the current owner and work it for their own benefit. When the war started with Ukraine, Prigozhin was given access to the prisons, which is something really odd for a mercenary organization. People were promised that they served 6 months in the army, then they would be let out and they could go back. Having said, if you just got a 30-year prison sentence, then it seemed, and you're thinking, well, I'll be 60 by the time I get out. Then the idea of going off to Ukraine to be in the army must seem like a pretty cushy number, particularly in the way that no doubt this is being described to those poor so-and-sos who are actually going there. Now, as you will know, he took Bakhmut, a town in northeastern Donetsk province, last week, or he claims to have captured it. Anyway, his troops are being taken out of the line. He is apparently in the process of handing over the positions in Donetsk, in Bakhmut to the Russian army. But when you're doing it with people you probably don't like at all, and you're not coordinating with them, I think this might be a rather difficult thing to do. To actually break off contact in a military sense is quite difficult to do in the best of times. Anyway, so Prigozhin's, when he was there in back sorts of nasty terms for the head of the army and the head of the Ministry of Defense, that Putin put up with this because he thought there was one balancing the other, a bit like sort of Roman empires did in the past. Bill mentions that the videos of him promising prisoners freedom, it's a bit like something from a Wild West movie. It is indeed. I mean, I bet this has happened before in times, but that something like this should happen in modern times. And there's something else actually, which I will bring up now, which I thought about doing a separate video on, is the subject of post-traumatic stress disorder. As far as I can tell, that in Russia there is no provision for people with PTSD. Now, the problem with one of the things that PTSD actually does, I mean, I went out with a woman whose former husband had been in Chechnya. I mean, some of the stories that she told me, and the problem is that it can make people act much more violently, and a bit like actually Alzheimer's can have a similar effect as well. Child murderers, violent assaulters, and of this nature. You send them off to the Ukraine, give them more knowledge of how to use weapons and of violence, show them violence up front. They return with PTSD to certain their communities, which had only just put them away or a few months earlier. And you can imagine what this is likely to do. It is absolutely shocking that even prisoners of this nature should be used. But having said that, I do appreciate the fact that they're even more useless to the Putin's Russia than normal civilians are, or citizens are. So that would be the reason why they're doing this. Thing is, Prigozhin does have this private army. It's a private army which is possibly better trained and has more experience than elements of the Russian army. The Russian army has dreadful morale. I bet the Wagner Group has also got dreadful morale. But the fact is, I think he's now threatening to turn this private army onto the Kremlin. That is my and Brian just made a good joke up there. He says it isn't a joke, but I'm just going to repeat it. The definition of a recipe for disaster. So, with this, bearing this in mind, I started thinking of this today, and I thought this is a bit like what happened in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago, when the legions were not allowed to enter the city gates. Or, for example, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, because the Rubicon is a river in Tuscany, northern bit of Italy, and part of the northern bit of Italy. And I think it flows into the sea somewhere to the north of somewhat north of Rimini, and so it's a long way from Rome. But the Roman legions weren't allowed to cross it, and Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and marched into Rome and made himself the big boss. So it's something along. I get the impression it's something along these lines that Wagner might suddenly, with Prigozhin at its head, move in and make Prigozhin the new Tsar or something along those lines. Is that what he's planning? I think Putin has allowed Prigozhin to do this because he's trying to balance one lot off against the other, and it's a situation where people can say, oh yeah, Putin is great, and indeed the military leaders. Indeed, when I read the Russian press, I read an interview by a former Russian general who's now in the Duma, and he was saying that yeah, he sympathizes with Prigozhin, he understands his problem, he's not getting him ammunition, and he himself, he wrote, was a Wagnerite. It seems a rather strange thing for a professional army officer to be admitting to, now a member of parliament. But why is he doing this? Because he wants to be on Prigozhin's side when the problems really get bad. And I think this is now what is happening. Of course, had this been Stalin's time, Gerasimov and Shoigu would probably have been shot. I don't think that's going to happen to them now, and I don't even think they'll get poisoned. I think they'll just end up being told to resign and then probably having to leave the country. Don't know where they're going to go. Maybe North Korea. That's probably quite nice this time of year anyway. So when Prigozhin threatens a civil war, what I believe he's doing is this. He's saying, look, I've got an army and I can bring that army down on you anytime I want. And indeed, that's more or less is how they're behaving in Africa. They are local warlords, and Putin must be pretty frightened. He's got this character Prigozhin who is out of control, who's got no humanity or ethics about him. Who can he rely on? Can he get someone in the FSB to ask Prigozhin to eat a poisoned pie or something like that? That I don't know. Prigozhin still continues to state his loyalty to Putin, but how loyal is he? I keep thinking, going back to the Roman generals and to ancient Rome, and thinking about these people who actually stood up to the tyrannical emperor, whoever it may have been. Nero was brought down by generals who stood up to him. Caligula was murdered, or effectively supplanted by the Praetorian Guard, and his uncle was put on the throne in his place. I see it somewhere along these lines. The army all the time overthrew people, I should say, in South America or in Thailand. It's done it not such a long time ago. So I think that's what Prigozhin's talking about when he says he will start a civil war. He will start it, and he will aim it not just at Shoigu and Gerasimov and the army, but I think he's making a bid for power. So anyway, you can write down below what you think, and am I right, am I wrong, and what would you do if you were Putin? But for the moment, thanks very much for listening. I hope you found that of interest, and all the best from me here in Poland. Thank you.